I am George Moker, Director of the Entrepreneurship Program here at the Sawyer Business School. It's my pleasure to kick off this edition of Innovation Hub from WGBH and PRI. Tonight's topic will focus on discussing the power shift from big business to startups, small firms, and individuals based on technology. Before we begin, I would like to welcome WGBH CEO John Abbott, Head of Radio Phil Rado, and Suffolk University President Norman Smith. Today is an exciting time to get in the startup space. Unlike the dot-com era where business performance was really based on technology and not necessarily business performance, today we have a completely different phenomenon where companies are leveraging what was found 20 years ago in the dot-com era and creating new things like crowdfunding and social media, 3D prototyping. Technology is going to a totally different level. As a result of this innovation, we're finding out that most of the real innovations occurring at the startup and individual levels. And we're seeing larger firms really acquiring smaller firms in order to be innovative. Forbes magazine reported that there were 40 startups with a valuation of more than $1 billion in the past year. They are projecting next year that number will exceed 100. Millions have now become billions, so the stakes are much, much higher, leading to greater risk, yet a higher risk and reward for both stakeholders and the global economy. Without further delay, it is my pleasure to introduce Karim Mele. Kara is the host and executive editor of Innovation Hub from WGBH and PRI, which she started in 2011. Innovation Hub launched nationally in 2014. The show focuses on creative thinking in areas from healthcare to transportation, technology to education. The show has featured panelists including Sal Khan, Marissa Meyer, Tom Friedman, Jared Diamond, and Steve Wozniak, among others. Kara contributes to The Takeaway with John Hockenberry and WGBH's Morning Edition. Her writing has appeared in the Boston Globe, the National Journal, the Boston Herald, the Atlantic.com, the Huffington Post, and the International Herald Tribune. She holds a PhD from Tufts and a BA from Yale. Ladies and gentlemen, Karim Mele.
Thank you so much. I want to thank Suffolk and WGBH for supporting this event and our sponsor, State Street. And we're hoping this will be an interactive event. So inside your programs, you've got a 5x8 card. And later on in the night, we're going to be asking you if you've got any questions. So as the night goes along and you think of questions, feel free to jot them down. About 7:45, people will be coming through the aisles and collecting those questions. So let me talk a little bit about where the idea for this topic came from. And, you might as well start with high heels. Any woman who is packed for a vacation and wanted to put in some flats so they could actually walk somewhere and some high heels so they could, look nice at a party is familiar with the problem of once you've done that, you have no room left in your suitcase. A couple of years ago, I met a woman who had just graduated from a business program, and she had this really interesting idea, which was you have a flat, but you attach to it a high heel. You just sort of bring the high heel, and your flat becomes your high heel at night. And it was a really interesting idea. But what was particularly fascinating to me was that she brought in this little piece of black plastic, and it was sort of stacked up, and she said, this is the high heel. I printed it myself on a 3D printer. And it was the first thing that I ever saw that was printed on a 3D printer. So here was this person with an idea, and she was able, instead of spending $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 going to a shoe company or renting a piece of very, very high-end equipment, she was able to really create something. And that is sort of what tonight is about. This idea of individuals, because of the technology that's available, now being able to take brilliant ideas and put them into practice and not have to go to the CEO in the corner office and say, believe me, this is a good idea. They can actually do it. So this is our wonderful panel that's going to talk about this topic tonight. Jason Pontin is the editor-in-chief and the publisher of MIT Tech Review. Jessica Banks is the founder of Rock Paper Robot in New York, and the creator of this amazing levitating table right here. We'll talk more about that. Yes, which springs back.
You break it, you buy it.
Nicco Mele is the author of The End of Big. He also teaches at Harvard's Kennedy School, and Karim Lakhani teaches at Harvard Business School and is the principal investigator for the Harvard NASA Tournament Lab. So let's start with this. We're going to talk about a bunch of technologies tonight, but one of them is 3D printing. So there's a 3D printer. They can print all sorts of things, from a very simple high heel to a saxophone that you can play sort of on the high end. And we have a CEO of a local 3D printing company that was kind enough to come and talk us through what 3D printing is and how it works. AJ Perez, you want to come on out? So AJ is president of NV Bots, and they created for us, here you can see actually the 3D printing market, something that you're very much a part of, and this is the last few years and what's projected. And what's particularly interesting about this graph is the thing you can't see, which is just like DVD players got cheaper and cheaper over time, the same thing is happening with 3D printers. So that even though these numbers are going up, that is exaggerated by the fact that, you know, the 2009 price of a printer is much, much higher than the 2020 price of a printer. So tons of these now are being bought. So your company put together a little video for us of the Innovation Hub logo being printed. So just sort of talk us through what's happening here.
Yeah, sure. So what's going on here is this is a time-lapse video, so it's sped up of real printing time. The extruder is the piece that's red, and that's what's going around. It's following an XY toolpath, and it's kind of like a hot glue gun. So it takes a plastic through the top of this hot element, pushes it through, and then squirts it out and follows an XY toolpath. And then slowly over time, the plate begins to lower so that you add layer by layer. So 3D printing, other people know it as additive manufacturing. It's a process of making something from nothing by adding layer to layer.
And that's
this
what they made.
part that you see here is what I'm holding in my hand, actually came off of the printer spinning just like that.
Yeah. So, we are going to have a chance tonight to actually see a 3D printer, right? You brought one with you.
That's right.
Let's
Bring it on
look
out.
at it. It's coming out. It's
Cart's a
being
little difficult to
escorted
navigate.
carefully.
Thanks, Forrest. So this is the machine that we build, and that's what you saw in that video. This piece right here is the hot end. That's the extruder. That's what moves around and squirts the plastic out to build it up layer by layer over time. There's a lot of things that we do that make this printer unique, but most importantly is a target audience, which is little kids. And getting 3D printers in front of little kids, because just like coding in the 70s and 80s was a generational thing, and the level of software development we see today in the market, I personally believe, and a lot of academics believe, that the future of 3D printing is going to be in the next generation, not with what exists today.
And I want to get into that in a minute, but I talked about this being an interactive night, and it sort of starts now. We are going to print something during this panel, so it'll take, like an hour or so to print, and you are going to choose what we print during the night. So get out your phones. Normally they don't say this at a performance, but get out your phones.
Turn off the ringer.
Yeah, make sure they're on mute, but get out your phones. And we are going to have you vote. AJ brought 4 different potential models that they can print, and you're going to vote on what one you want. And this is what you're going to text. This is the number that you're going to text it to. But before we do that, just to make sure everything's working, we're going to do a test question for you to make sure you've got the voting process down. Ice cream flavors. What do you prefer, vanilla or chocolate? There is a right answer.
Yes.
My producer said earlier that anybody who picks vanilla will be cleared from the room, but we won't do that. We'll let you stay, though we might have to have a talk afterwards. So text your answer, vanilla or chocolate, and then we'll see what the results are. I like that the panelists have also gotten out their phones, because this is a very important vote. This could be more important than the next vote. Still see people. We'll give you another couple seconds.
I kind of want to hear the Jeopardy music.
I know. Dun, 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 dun. Yeah.
Make sure you text the number, not the name.
Oh,
Yes, definitely text the number that corresponds with the flavor.
I had the name.
All right, so let's see how the results are going. Oh, see, people are taking my cue. Good job. And it's you'll see it changes as it receives votes. Oh, chocolate is really pulling way out ahead of vanilla.
Makes me sad.
Oh,
he's off the panel.
that's right. So that's how it works. So now we're going to do the real thing, which is what do you want printed during this panel? And then at the very end, AJ will come out. We will wheel this back so you don't have to listen to the printer printing. And then AJ will come out with whatever you voted for at the very end and show you the finished product. So let's see if we can. Yeah, great. So these are the 4 choices. Do you want to tell people a little bit about these? They're very science-y, just in case.
Yeah. So like I said, our company's focused on the educational aspects of 3D printing and what you can do to make STEM more hands-on. So the 4 models that we're going to be choosing from tonight are an atomic orbital, so a representation of the valence electrons, or at least where they could be in an atom. A Klein bottle, which is a mathematical representation of a 3D Mobius strip. A double helix, which shows you how DNA twists. And then a volcano, just to show you what a volcano looks like.
What's the hardest to do?
Of these? Well, it's actually interesting. The Klein bottle can't be made any other way than 3D printing because it's got internal features that you couldn't manufacture using any other process other than doing it in an additive way.
So while you are texting what your choice is here, talk a little bit about the idea of where the idea came from of making sure that 3D printing was a part of education, because that's not normally how we think about 3D printing right now.
Exactly. So me and my co-founders, we were all at MIT together. We were students and we were taking classes and working on projects. And we needed to do rapid prototyping. So we decided to build our own 3D printer. And in doing so, we realized 3D printers really weren't easy enough to use unless you had an undergraduate degree in mechanical engineering from MIT, or they weren't easy to share, meaning that all of us, if we wanted to print, we had to physically go back to the machine and engage it. What most people don't realize is that 3D printers today, with the exception of our product, are essentially in the Stone Age from the user's perspective. The technology is amazing and they can create insane things, but it requires a person at every step of the way. And I thought to myself, well, this is an amazing technology that can make things that you couldn't physically make any other way. This concept of a Klein bottle is absolutely the most abstract concept mathematically that most people can't get their head around. But when I put it in a kid's hand, they understand it. And it's this concept of taking MIT's mens et manus mentality, mind in hand, and trying to apply that to STEM education more broadly. Make learning hands-on for kids. So instead of staring at a 2D chalkboard or a 2D whiteboard or a 2D computer screen or a 2D piece of paper, now learning and STEM education becomes a hands-on 3D experience for everybody.
Okay, so let's see. Let's go to the poll here. See, oh my gosh.
Yes.
I wonder if it was influenced by that.
I'm glad I asked the question.
Okay, well, it looks
All right.
like the Klein bottle is far
I'm
and
gonna go
away
get
the
this
winner,
printed.
so they're going to go take it away, and we're going to print it out, and
Thank
then at the end you can... We'll show it to you. You can, handle it. You can really check it out if you haven't seen something that's 3D printed before. Okay. So on to the panel, and then we'll check back in with them soon. Nicco, I want to start with you because you wrote the book, The End of Big, and I think I want to start with this idea from Roger McNamee, who's a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, famed venture capitalist, was there the day that Jeff Bezos pitched Amazon and thought, that's cool, I love books by mail. And I talked to him recently, and he said, We have had a social revolution where young people in a tough job market are just starting companies. There may be 100 times as many startups over the last 4 or 5 years as in any period in the history of Silicon Valley. That is a really striking situation. What's going on?
I think that technology has, over the last 35 years, pushed power out of institutions to individuals. If we were talking about a computer 35 years ago, we'd be talking about something that might fill this stage. And today, people walk around with these devices on their person that are significantly more powerful than a Cray supercomputer circa 1975 and a lot cheaper. And with that kind of computing power on people's persons, that really creates all kinds of changes to what's possible. In 1820, the vast majority of Americans were self-employed as shopkeepers and subsistence farmers. By 1920, the vast majority of Americans are employed by a corporation. And over the last 20 years, that pendulum has swung back in a significant way to people being self-employed, to people starting their own companies. And it sure beats having a boss.
Well, Karim Lakhani, what is happening? Do you think, so if you take the other side of what Roger McNamee said and what Nicco is saying, the other side is companies. Are companies, big companies, the companies that people wanted to work for once upon a time, the IBMs and the Intels and the Coca-Colas and the General Electrics, are they losing some of the smartest people?
Yeah, so I think what's happening is that people just have many more choices. So now you with your friend can be self-employed and participate in the marketplace and have your skills be demonstrated. So oftentimes people go to companies as a signal saying, I have a GE, I worked at GE myself when I graduated, right? And having GE on a resume was worthwhile because you felt like that was going to signal to the marketplace that you had some qualities. Now, the marketplace, and you can now advertise your skills because people can observe your outputs. So you can write software, and if that software gets used by many people, either the App Store or on GitHub, then that in itself is a recognition which you don't need to go to GE for. And I think that's the shift that's going on, where the GEs of the world are saying, how do I attract the best talent? And the best talent says, why would I want to work for you, right, when I can do my own thing? And so GE comes back and says, well, we will solve big problems, so that's why you want to work for us. But now I think the power is also in the hands of the individual or a small team to also solve the big problems.
And let's put some numbers to this. So if you look at employees, old companies versus new companies, Instagram had 13 employees when it was taken over for $1 billion. I was looking around for a company that's worth about $1 billion, and I finally hit on one after going through a lot of companies. Barnes & Noble, they've got about 33,000 employees. Yeah. What is happening that 13 people can build a company that's worth as much as a company that employs? This is just full-time employees, not part-time employees at Barnes & Noble. Yeah. What is going on that 13 people are worth as much as 33,000 people?
So I think the first thing that we see is there's been a secular shift in the cost of computation, right? So when I was graduating from MIT, to do a startup, it would be $10 million, right? And 30 engineers, and you buy all this hardware and software to get going. Today, and I graduated a long time ago. Today, you are. I mean, if you get $500,000, you might be okay because the computation cost to you can get computation from the cloud, you can get tools from open source, and you can scale in ways that just was not possible before. And that's why we see Instagram basically was running on Amazon. Right? They had access to the Amazon web servers to be able to do what they were able to do. Same thing with WhatsApp as well. And I think what's going on is that the technology is becoming democratized, access to the technology is becoming widespread, and the tools for creation that generate value in the marketplace are also becoming democratized. And then what you're seeing is this creative recombination. People are coming up with new ideas and can instantly try them out in the marketplace. Before, you had to get distribution, right, from Amazon, or if you're a musician, you have to get distribution from a record deal. Today, my colleague in London and his 2 kids have an iTunes band, right, and they have global distributions on iTunes, right, singing from their garage, and that's what's so different about the world.
It kind of begs the question about: are there any advantages to scale? Like what is the advantage to scale today?
I think that's a great question, and I think certainly, look, if you're going to make a 787. Right? You need scale. you need engineering talent, you need testing talent, and you need the ability to build something at that scale.
You don't want somebody saying, this is like the first airplane we've built, but we're sure it's going to work
No,
out.
it may be fine, but I think
We crowdsourced it.
we could
We
crowdsource
crowdsourced it.
and certainly
Everybody contributed something.
absolutely. And so I mean, I think the question is, so the critique about this, right, about Instagram, is some of the best talent from MIT, from Stanford, from Harvard, from Caltech, right, from Berkeley, are helping us click on the next ad. Right? They're not really solving really important problems. And some important problems require scale, require wet labs, require things that take time, and coordination. And so I think the question becomes...
And diversity of expertise.
Diversity of expertise. And the question becomes, what's the organizational form that can sustain this? Is it always going to be the General Electrics and the IBMs and the AT&Ts of the world where this has to take place, or the Boeings? Or can we have more fluid, more distributed forms take place? I think that's the debate we need to be in as well.
Jessica, you know a lot about robotics. You make physical things. You are the person who's out there actually and created her own company. What do you see in terms of, do you feel like you're part of a movement of people?
I do. I feel, there's a tremendous movement and a community of startups around me, tech startups. There are a lot of things, particularly about me, that are very trendy. Woman in tech, we are makers, whatever you want to call them. Having a startup, we're kind of gritty in Brooklyn. And these things, what scares me, however, about this whole thing is that it's trendy now. And I'm like, wait, guys, this is my life. I'm not a trend, right?
Not a hashtag?
Exactly. Like, when the wave is over, I'm going to still be swimming here, right? And I think there are a lot of issues or questions to be asked about, you were saying, the best talent. Well, when does it suddenly become the best talent? When you see them making the money? There's a lot of best talent that are brilliant, and they're doing things that aren't suddenly making $1 billion, yes. Right? And the understanding of what value is. We're in a world now where there's a huge psychological inflation around these kinds of technologies, and it's being spurred by the VCs. And I think it's, I don't think this can last, right? And then if that doesn't last, after we figure out how we've defined, talent and value, if it goes away, we have to redefine again. So what are we really talking about? I guess.
Did you think about going to work at a big company instead of starting
totally
out?
unemployable.
So you had to start your own company.
Yeah. It's crossed my mind. To me, it's like the fallback, right?
So which big company would you want to go work at?
I would probably actually work at NASA.
Okay.
Maybe something like Google. It's weird to have those two in the same sentence these days. But I would probably work at NASA.
Jason, it's interesting because Jessica sort of brought up this idea almost of, is there a bubble? Like that a lot of smart people want to do startups, but Roger McNamee said something like, there are a lot of these startups that are going to die in infancy. He said something very sort of pointed like that, but they can't all become Instagram, and they can't all become Google, and they can't all become Facebook. And I assume at some point, those smart people are going to say, well, I need a job. I'm going to go work at Apple.
Well, the short answer to your earlier question about how Instagram can be worth $1 billion is a market valuation bubble. It's overvalued.
Really?
Totally overvalued.
Of the 4 people on the panel, 3 actually do work for institutions. Could I see a show from the audience of how many of you work for someone, not for yourself, but for an organization? So most of the people in the audience, I think we can overstate the maker movement. Karim is, of course, right that there has been a secular shift in the cost of doing new things. It's dropped, computation is very cheap, storage is very cheap, and that encourages a kind of a renaissance of innovation. But at the same time, we live in a technological civilization, and technology companies, successful ones become monopolies. And there's enormous institutional power to companies like Google, to Facebook, to Microsoft, to Oracle. And I think you see an interesting kind of tranching of the world between very big organizations like Facebook that own the standard and that can lock everyone out.
Almost a monopoly.
Almost, well, they are monopolies.
Yeah, right.
And then on the other, I mean, who cares about LO or whatever the rest of them are? So, and on the other side, you have smaller companies doing creative things. What has changed, though, is how quickly big companies can be disruptive. So to use your Instagram example, 16 people, $1 billion. 20 years ago, Kodiak was a gigantic organization. And now it's entirely gone. So I think the shift is how long a large institutional organization can count on remaining on the S&P or whatever other measure you want to move before it's disruptive. Eric Schmidt says with the executive chairman of Google, says with a certain ruefulness, we're where we are now, but we won't be here forever. And we don't even know what's going to wipe us out. So I think that's what's changed. It's not that institutions are powerless. In some ways, they've never been so powerful. It's they can be disrupted extremely quickly by people like Jess.
Okay, but let me push on that a little bit, because if you think about General Electric, or sort of old school company versus the kind of companies you've been talking about, each individual person, so if we're talking about creative people, each individual person is worth a whole lot more at a Facebook, at an Apple, than they are at a General Electric.
Well, General Electric's-
This is the value per employee. So if you take sort of the company's worth and divide it by the number of people who work there, this is what you're seeing. And what you see is old companies employ a lot of people, and new companies make a lot of money, but they don't need to employ that many people. So it's possible they are picking up those creative people who failed in their startups, but they don't need to pick up a whole lot of them, and they can each make a lot of money.
But this could just be the market
But this-
valuation bubble.
But this is just a phantasm of the market valuation.
I see.
Right.
Could come crashing down.
And then if we go out this many years again, maybe these are gone.
So
and GM is there.
Let's
right?
talk about GE. GE is an amazing company. You want to talk about doing big global things that no one else can do? Go to GE's pilot plant in Schenectady, New York. They've placed it right next to their labs, and they do an amazing thing. Incredibly brilliant people, the kind of people which we're now championing, think up ridiculous ideas. And then they walk, I swear to God, 200 feet down to the pilot plant, and they say, could you make this for us? Yes. And then engineers make it. And if it'll scale there, they scale it to another larger size. GE does things at a scale no one else can do in the world. It makes nuclear submarines. It makes huge wind turbines. It makes medical equipment. I would argue that's possibly socially more useful than Facebook, probably Microsoft.
They're obviously
Amazon.
they're obviously underpaying their employees at Facebook.
So, what I'd add, though, is that what has shifted, and I just wrote a paper in the HBR on GE's embrace of the industrial internet. So what they're realizing is that they need to make their machines smarter, make them connected, do all the things that Google and Apple have done in the consumer space, but to do it in the industrial space. But what has shifted, I think what's interesting is that Facebook, Apple, Google, Microsoft are actually ecosystems, right? They compete on the basis of ecosystems. They have sets of other partners that work with them and allow them to compete in the marketplace. So the App Store and what that has enabled in terms of the one-off or the two sets of people participating. And what GE is realizing is that in order for them to be able to compete in the future, because the world is going digital, they have to make these smart machines, right? They need to also build ecosystems. So what you can imagine is a world where even your jet engine will have apps on top that will need the one-off people to be creating those apps. And that I think is the interesting new shift where you will see before the model was vertical integration, right? Everything will be done from the coal factory all the way down to the cars were owned by Ford. That model has shifted out, and now there's a view of the ecosystem or the platform coming where lots of companies can sit on top of the firm that is driving the ecosystem.
These companies are like platforms for talent. They enable access to resources that otherwise in the past would have required much larger companies.
Absolutely.
Yes. And they're also people that are hard to continually employ.
Yes.
At the company.
Exactly.
Because innovating fast means that you have to have an agility.
Yes.
at the company, and a big corporation has too much infrastructure to be able to do that quickly.
There's-
And
there's-
Nicco, Mike, let me just ask Nicco one question. Is GE, are these big companies, are they doing a good enough job of getting those really smart people? And I'll just throw a thought at you from Maynard Webb, who was the COO of eBay. And one thing he said is, at Stanford, and this may be, anecdotal just from him, but his feeling was, at Stanford, in the graduating class last year, even if you got offered great jobs like at Google, that was kind of selling out. People wanted to start their own companies. It's uncool to actually be in a company where everybody tells you what to do. So the question is, even if GE is doing the cool stuff, can they get the people who are the best?
Well, I definitely think we're living in an age of kind of a cult of entrepreneurship of sorts. And that's both very exciting in some ways, but I think there's also some significant downsides to it.
Just knows.
No, carry on.
No, just that I'm a little conflicted about it. On the one hand, like when I actually started my own company, I didn't go work at a big company. I didn't go work at a big institution because, it just seemed like I was going to have to sit around a long time to get any real responsibility or opportunity. And I had some really exciting things I wanted to do. And that led me to start my own business. And so that I appreciate. By the same token, I have discovered that I had to learn some really hard lessons along the way that I think in a well-managed company, a big well-managed company, they might have helped me learn those.
The way a big company like GE actually manages this cult of the entrepreneur and the United States and the simultaneous collapse of a particularly engineering-educated middle class is they've left the United States. So GE's largest research facility is in Bangalore, India. They've got a huge research facility in China. There are engineers who are incredibly smart in other parts of the world who want stability, who want a permanent paycheck, who want to live in a gated community on the GE campus, and that's how GE manages it. So GE is looking for the smartest people in the world, but they're not always looking for them here in the United States.
The other part,
Quirky, the idea of that, working with Quirky too is an interesting kind of mechanism for trying to get new innovation in and funding new ideas. Some of these things seem a little bit like acts of desperation to me.
Yeah.
I mean, and trying to be cool.
On the part of big companies, they're getting desperate.
Yeah, I think a little bit. I wouldn't say totally desperate, but I think that there is a palpable trend toward the need to change, and how to do that within a big infrastructure is hard.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that. I mean, I think the thing to think about is that people have preferences for being an entrepreneur. They might be more risk-taking preferences, right, or being in instability, right? And the question is, what's happened is that the options to be an entrepreneur, to make things, to build things like you have done, were just simply not available 2 decades ago. And that is
Or
now,
even a decade ago,
or even
really.
a decade ago. So that is now opened up. So on the margin, when you're sitting and you're saying, do I go work for NASA or do I do my own thing? Right? If the own thing was going to be very difficult for you to launch, right, or even impossible, you would have ended up at NASA. And now what's happened is that those that have an inkling, right, now have the ability to go ahead and do that. But there's probably a duplicate for you who's working at NASA because they didn't want the risk, they didn't want the heartache of starting your own company and doing all that kind of stuff. And so we should be just careful about thinking that what we're seeing in the economy is a sorting of talent, a set of people that have preferences to be independent, to do their own thing, now can do so. But a whole lot of people in China or India or even here are just super happy working in a big company as well. So I think there might be too much flash and a bit of a Silicon Valley bubble going on in terms of all the attention that goes to that. But sort of when you look at the real economy, right, the people that do insurance adjusting or the people that are running shops, there's still a lot of need for labor and a lot of people who prefer to work in those settings than to be living paycheck to paycheck, credit card to credit card in a Silicon Valley startup.
So let's look beyond technology a little bit at some of the most creative people who maybe aren't in technology. We've talked about 3D printing as something that allows you to, okay, I want to create a new kind of high-heeled shoe, and you just go and do it. About 10 years ago, a guy whose work some of you know, left NASA, and he decided he wanted to do a comic strip. It was going to be an online comic strip. It didn't make any sense in terms of a model for success. No sense at all. You know how comic strips work. Like, you know how you make money from comic strips. You make a comic strip, and then the St. Louis Post-Dispatch runs it, and the Dallas Morning News, and, they all give you their cut, and that's how you make money. That's not what Randall Munroe did. So some of you know this, XKCD. So he started putting his comic strip up for free online. He just turned 30 a few weeks ago. And he also had the New York Times #1 bestseller also a few weeks ago. And he was doing art. He did art, and he put it out there in a way that was totally, totally different from anything people had done before. And it worked. And he lives on his income full time, does very, very well. And I mean, Nicco, let me go back to you. This idea of the very creative people being able to break away from the system. He didn't make money the way Charles Schultz made money with peanuts, right?
Yeah, no syndication.
No syndication. In fact, he allows you to take his comic strip for free and put it on your website. He doesn't care. He's like, take it, great. In a way, that's free publicity for me, which is I mean, there would have been a time you would have gotten a letter in the mail saying, take that comic strip down. That's my property. What's happening? Do you see this going beyond technology? Where does this fit in the creative space?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we saw this first in the music space. This hit music before it hit many of the other creative industries. 2014 looks like it's going to be the first year where there are no platinum selling recording artists. There is at least one platinum selling recording album, the Frozen soundtrack, but there aren't any actual artists, right? That's an amalgamation of different artists.
Weird Al tried, but he didn't quite make it. Yeah.
And I think that's actually emblematic of a kind of splintering, almost really the end of the blockbuster in a sense, as platforms like Apple and Amazon allow really wide distribution, and the long tail allows individual artists to, I don't know that I want to say thrive, but allows individual artists to have some modest success. Kevin Kelly called it the 1,000 true fans theory, that if you're an artist, you just need 1,000 true fans, 1,000 fans who'll give you $100 a year, and that you could make a living that way. And that's certainly part of what we're seeing, I think, in the digital age, and it's emblematic in platforms like Kickstarter. But it also comes with some downsides. I think it kind of affects our culture, our sense of shared sense of what's possible. I like to talk about it. In 1967, one of the top 10 highest grossing films in the country was Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, a film with major Hollywood actors and actresses about interracial marriage. It opened nationwide at a time when interracial marriage was illegal in more than a dozen states. And it was part of a kind of national conversation about race in this country and the civil rights movement. And if we're all consuming our own entertainment, our own news, if we're self-selecting in various ways, I think that does have consequences for the public sphere.
Jessica, you're sort of in this art meets tech space, which is a little bit Randall Munroe. He succeeded by doing something online, but it's very sort of fringe and a little bit nerdy, but that ended up tapping into what a lot of people were interested in, actually. So talk about what you see in terms of like artists and creative people being able to succeed if they can.
I think there are now platforms for people to show their work, and that is tremendous. And it's cool to have to find the new person, right? And so that whole culture of being able to work with curators who are trying to find the next thing and also be able to put your work out so a lot of people can see it is really important. I'm always amazed. For instance, we actually don't do marketing for our stuff. We will start to be doing it now, but every sale we got was organic. And I have no idea where they got them from. And it's from, and a lot of all the press, organic. Come find me, come find me. And then I see blogs and, reblog of something like this. And to me, that's like, that was a way for me to just easily, or, not even do anything and and get sales. And I think that that part of that is extremely powerful, is that people share information, and if something is good, it gets out there, it gets around. If people like something, you know,
It doesn't have to be
They
one
share
person
it.
in the newspaper who writes about you.
right?
It can be social
and it's
media.
shared. It's shared.
Talk about, you made this and very kindly traveled up from New York with it today. Tell us what we're looking at here.
So this is one of our signature pieces. So Rock Paper Robot, we do focus on transforming traditionally static objects into platforms that have enhanced versatility, both functionally and aesthetically. I will admit that this levitating table is a bit superfluous. You don't necessarily need one. But so basically, this table is a whole matrix of magnetized wooden cubes, all held in suspension by these tensile steel cables. And you can't magnetize wood. There are magnets embedded in every adjacent face, and they're repelling each other. And so the wires just kind of keep everything together. If you cut a wire, it's not very dramatic. It actually, one of the magnets just wants to get closer to another one that it can attract to, so it doesn't explode. It's kind of
That'd be kind of cool to make.
yeah, it'd be cool. It'd be cool. It just kind of flops over. And so we started making these and selling them. You can look through it, put light through it. I like it too because you can change the shape of your table, kind of push sides in. You can actually put very heavy things on here. So if you just mush down one end of it, it's pretty mushy. But if you distribute the mass of something over it, you can kind of, put a lot of weight on top of the table. And so basically, these skew very male. We have almost all guys and at Google, a lot of them buy these kinds of tables. And this is really, what we consider to be a functional art. We're moving into now our first mass-produced things. We do robotic chandeliers that can adapt to what's happening in the room. And now we'll be moving into stuff like ergonomically designed tables that can adjust to physiological feedback, so that you have a more comfortable situation when you're working or doing whatever you want.
Facebook.
What I was going to say, what is it?
If you must be.
What does a table that adjusts to physiological feedback mean?
So if, let's say, with a lot of sensors, ones that are on you, ones in the room, if the table notices you're doing this or can understand what function you're performing and how you're using the table, it can change slowly so that you don't end up very stiff after a while.
Wow.
Even maybe imperceptibly moving slightly so that your muscles aren't always static, right? So that you're not disturbed by it, but it's helping like this. Or doing something that just makes you look up and away every now and again.
So who would, in the old days, who would do that? Who would make that kind of a product?
Who in the old days?
What kind of a
Da
company?
Vinci.
Da Vinci. So we're like back to Renaissance. But would Steelcase be a company that would ever even dream about doing this, or are they so locked into their model that
I think maybe Herman Miller.
Okay.
Maybe Knoll tends to actually hire a lot of engineers and not furniture designers
Yes.
to work on products. So potentially those. Kinds
But
of
why
things.
you instead of them? Why your company instead of them?
Maybe it's because it could be that it's harder for them to switch around stuff and come up.
Did any of them come
skills.
try and recruit you? Like when you're getting out of school?
No, not when I was getting out of school. And right now we just finished our first financing round, and so we're starting to make things more public. We were kind of on the DL for a while, and when I was first doing a lot of these, high-end products, after a while I realized this is a horrible business model. I'm essentially still a freelancer, right? You make a product, you wait for the client, and then you wait again, right? You hire the cheapest person, yourself, and you sell it. So it's like, this is a horrible business model. I have to make money when I sleep. And so now we're moving into mass production. And now that we'll be moving into mass production, I think that there will be some other conversations.
I think that actually speaks to a little bit of the another downside of the 1,000 True Fans model is, that most of our social policy, health insurance, education, retirement is built around assumptions about 9 to 5 institutional employment. And as we move to a world where, the United States right now, approximately a third of the workforce is self-employed. Another third is contingently employed, 30 hours a week at Walmart. The idea that most Americans are going to have a 9-to-5 institutional employment and that's how we're going to give them a high quality of life by surrounding that kind of framework with benefits doesn't really make any sense.
Jason, let me ask you about, this is another, by the way, person who, he actually was inspired by Randall Munroe and XKCD, and he created, this is Zach Weinersmith, he created a comic called SMBC, and he also sort of makes his own living from doing what to me would have been something that's fringe and kind of nerdy, and yet by getting all the fringes together,
Yes.
you sometimes realize, whoa, I've got a business here. And I wonder if you see that, Jason, like the sort of the fringe ideas, because you can reach all the nerds at the same time, are pretty decent.
Well, this was a popular idea 10 years ago, right? The long tail, that there was sufficient power in small groups of fans that if you could aggregate them all together into communities, there would be power. But I think we touched along the problem of that. There's not that much stability. There's not perhaps enough money. And we may have to rethink the way we organize our social compact. It's not clear anymore if we still require full employment for the entire population. And that's going to require a very difficult conversation in modern democracies. Smart people have some interesting ideas about how to manage a nation of contingently employed and part-time and self-employed people. No less a conservative than Milton Friedman suggested a guaranteed income. It's a very conservative idea, actually, rather than a Marxist idea. You're born, you're guaranteed an income, and you can spend it over the course of your life as you wish. You can invest in healthcare, you can invest in a new business, do what you want. You might do a deferred income tax credit. You could do more radical things, but I'm not sure anymore that the certainties we had in the previous century, the jobs that were being eliminated by new technologies would always be replaced by new jobs. I'm not sure that's obviously the case anymore. We really don't know, but...
You're really talking about like an efficiency provided by the
Yeah.
technology that's actually eliminating
Yeah.
jobs.
So I think that's happening. And there are
But
good...
Karl Marx talked about that at
Yeah.
the start of the Industrial Revolution as well, right? And there's been many... I think so. There were times during the Industrial Revolution where wages were stagnant, people were losing the manual labor jobs, and there was a ton of uncertainty about what was going to go on. But over time, people learned how to use the machines more effectively, and the skills to use those machines became the middle class. And I think we're at the same point right now, right, where the information revolution is now finally taking hold, right? And we're now basic, because your company is an infotech company as much as a furniture company, and we're now figuring out how. And at the time of the Industrial Revolution, there was significant inequality. Lots of capital was basically being accumulated at the guys that could build those types of machines and those types of companies. And over time, we figured out what the right division of labor was going to be and what the skills needed to be able to work with the machines.
Well,
I think we're at the same stage here.
You hope so. I mean, so we hope that it's like the Industrial Revolution. At the time of the American Civil War, 90% of Americans were employed on farms. 4% were employed on farms now. There's a gigantic shift to a post-agricultural society. That's always been historically the case, that jobs have been eliminated by technology and replaced by new jobs. But for the last 15 years, there's been a phenomenon that Eric Brinhoffson and Andy McAfee at MIT call the Great Decoupling. And the Great Decoupling is how wages of people who are still employed have been stagnant since 1970. At the very time that all the productivity gains of a growing economy have accrued to the top 1%, and more of the population has become underemployed or not employed at all. We don't actually know what's going to happen. So on the one hand, it's wonderful that we have tribes of people like Jess who are self-employed and doing great things. On the other hand, there's a world of increasing inequality, of people being unfulfilled by the jobs that we do have. And I think one of the things I often say as a technology editor is this is a conversation we have to have, in a civil society about what we want to do by technology. The message is we need to use technology rather than be used by it.
Let me put this on hold for 1 second. We want your questions now. So if you've written your question on your card, if you can hand it to the people who will come through the aisles in about a minute to pick them up, just pass it to the people sitting on the aisles. We will take some of those questions. It's interesting that you talk about this issue of inequality because, I had this conversation with Andrew McAfee, who you mentioned, not that long ago. And we had this interesting interchange where, he said, maybe in the future, people will work like 2 or 3 days a week if they make a lot of money and they don't need, they can get by with $150,000. They don't actually need $250,000. Yeah. And I said, well, maybe that will happen in the future. But look around you. Do the people that you know work any less hard today than they did 10 or 15 or 20 years ago? I would venture to say people work more. People are on call all the time, right? You are checking your email at 11 at night and 6:30 in the morning and the whole thing. And he said, yes, but Kara, none of us at this table need to work that hard to buy food for ourselves and to buy clothes. The reason we do it is because we just love to work.
And we're addicts.
Yeah, and we're
we're dopamine addicts, right? That we get these little things, the idea of the game of this work it's getting mixed up, right, in our brains too. And so I think that's a big part of it. Our very own brain mechanisms are being affected by this technology. It's creating different atmosphere.
Let's really quickly, since we're in the middle of 3D printing here, let's see if it comes on. I want to check on how the 3D printer is doing in the back. Let's see. I may have pressed this twice. Let's try it again. Oh, yeah. Let's see if there we go. Yep. So it's printing the Klein bottle. That's right. So it looks like it's getting close to done. So we'll see it in not too long. So anyway, just wanted to check in, just wanted to show you what's happening.
Teeny tiny.
They have heat sensors in there and so on.
Can we talk about 3D printing for a second?
Yes, in incoming quality. In
3D printing, can we talk about that for a second?
Yeah.
Of course, yeah.
I think there's everybody is very pro 3D printing now. It's very the rage, and I think it's important to understand that this is a tool. Okay, often I think I started 3D printing 15 years ago at MIT, right? And this is a tool. Right now, a lot of people are like, I'm going to get a 3D printer. I'm going to make everything, and then what do they realize? Open the box. What's not in the box? Skills. Creativity, right? And so what do they make? What I call kind of a digital poop, right? It's like another, something that's going to go on the end of your USB stick, or a spoon, which ultimately just took more energy and more material than the spoon that you would have at IKEA. And you can't wash it, right? And you probably shouldn't eat with it. So we're in the phase of this tool, and I'm all for giving tools to people and letting them understand what are the capacities and have people gain new skills. But I think that we are having a weird obsession with this technology now.
I think that's very fair. It's massive. There's a lot of hype around it. We can do some of the things that Jess is talking about, a kind of a rapid prototyping, a low-scale additive manufacturing that is kind of interesting for people who want to test things. And on the other end, we can do big additive manufacturing at companies like GE, where they'll actually make a wing or a gas turbine. What we can't do is the really interesting stuff in the middle, where most of industry actually takes place. That's where you want to combine different types of ink and materials at complex scales. But there's a woman you guys have to go and see her lab. Her name is Jennifer Lewis. She's up at Harvard. She is printing multiple inks, including vasculature, flesh. It is far out stuff. So that's the future of 3D printing, those mixtures of materials at different temperatures that do different things. But we're nowhere near that at the moment.
But I would just say, so I bought a 3D printer a couple years ago as book research, and I definitely had that experience of... of poop, you might say. But
I'm going to steal that, by the way, if I may. I'll credit you every time.
I'll tell you what it reminded me of. It really took me, my experience with my 3D printer was almost exactly how I felt with my first dial-up modem in 1991, which was you had to really figure it out, right? You had to like play with it, monkey with it. It was kind of a pain in the butt. It was definitely not consumer friendly, or I would think of it as mom friendly, right? And yet immediately this whole vista of what might be possible opens up.
I think that's highly
and even I think when I think back to my experience with my first dial-up modem in, I think it was like 1991, maybe 92, what I imagined was possible with that was actually an enormously limited vision of what we now have today, right?
So and
Yeah,
I think there's a general tendency to overhype, overestimate the impact of technologies in the short term, and then underestimate the long-term impact.
Yeah.
So if the BBS, the dial-up BBSs were the precursors of Facebook, nobody imagined Facebook at that time. Right? There was a lot of hype about it, but nobody imagined what this would take. And I think that's the stage where but I agree with you that it's what will matter is are the creativity, right, and the design skills and the imagination to make use of this tool.
Yeah.
And I think that's the promise. I was actually on Monday in my daughter's engineering class. She's in 10 years old at her school, and we had a 3D printer, and we were talking about it, and we were just saying, what could you do with this? And their imagination, a lot of them wanted to make pizza, right? Can I have it in my room so I can make pizza and not tell my mom about it? But a lot of them were being pretty inventive with what could happen with that. And I think that's the exciting part.
Yeah,
around
that is
it.
exciting.
So I'm interested in looking forward. I mean, we've talked about this idea that 3D printing right now, okay, maybe it's like dial up, 20, 25 years ago, but 3D printing is going to get better because things get better. And I'm interested in how this whole sort of economy of the individual gets better. And Karim, I'm going to go get the questions, but talk for a second. I don't know this woman at all, Ilya Wang, who creates handbags, but I pulled this off of the website Kickstarter, which has sort of fueled this economy of the individual. You're an expert on this idea of crowdfunding. I have a good idea. I'll need to go to a CEO. I'm going to show it to everybody, and people will think it's cool, and they will give me money. So talk a little bit about how you see this working.
Yeah. So I think over the last 2 decades, we've seen sort of this emergence of both crowdsourcing and crowdfunding as well. Part of it is because we have these digital networks that connect people. But I think what is interesting is that if you think about selecting projects, selecting ideas, typically there's one person in a company, one person in a committee, right, that holds the weight, right? And there's a technical term for them, right? It's typically the highest paid person's opinion, right? The hippo. The hippo decides what gets funded, right, what does not get funded. And there's a lot of research that shows that there's a lot of biases that hippos may have. People typically have biases about what may or may not work. And what this does is it does 2 things. It helps eliminate this bias because you now go to the marketplace and you ask the marketplace to help fund the idea. And the market decides if the idea is any good or not. But secondly, it lowers the cost of entry. So I don't need to fund $1 million myself, right? I can fund $10, right? It's a Starbucks expense for me, right? And if I just aggregate a lot of $10 together, I may have $1 million available to me. So it's both gets over this bias issue that experts have, that hippos have, but also it lowers the threshold for entry. So now things that were not possible before now become possible. So I think you had a Oculus VR, right?
Yeah, so this is just how that woman makes her handbag. She shows it. This is her process. Yeah. And it's mostly very low tech, right? Leather and, and a lot of Post-its. But she also, has a digital camera and a little studio for taking really cool pictures so that she can upload it to the web. So it's like this coming together of furniture is not a new idea and coffee tables aren't a new idea, but the way that people hear about you, Jessica, is totally new. Yes.
So again,
then
I just
there's
saw Nicco wear a Pebble watch. This was also crowdfunded as well. And again, the Silicon Valley VCs would not fund this because they believed in the Facebook apps, right? Hardware was not a sexy thing for these guys. but they got it done through Kickstarter.
Nico,
So-
can you read emails on your watch?
Yes.
Awesome. Just wanted to know.
Yeah. And when my phone rings, my watch tells me who it is.
Okay.
But this again, this was the hippos and the VCs were saying no, 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 bad idea. Same thing with VR, no, 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 bad idea. But they were able to aggregate demand and get across the biases that these guys have in order to be able to succeed. And I think that's what's so amazing. And what we're seeing is, you have whole communities of people creating, and also they can now rely on everybody else to help fund those creations as well, which I think is very exciting.
I think that's a hugely salient point, is that it enables hardware.
Yes.
And for 40 years or however many, I think, manufacturers, hardware makers have sort of been punished by a lot of different things, regulatory. I mean, you have to have stuff. You have to buy stuff. It's way more expensive. And so this, I think, is a great shift into more of the hardware, and that's valuable.
What you're looking at here, by the way, if you aren't familiar with Oculus, is you're basically looking at, you can enter this 3D world. So if you're playing a video game, it's like you're immersed in the world. And they said, we want $250,000 to make this reality, because that's what you have to do on Kickstarter. You have to say, this is my goal. This is what I want. People said, yeah, well, we really like this idea, and gave them $2.5 million. And then Facebook said, we love this idea, and gave them $2 billion. So they used it in some ways as their talent scouting. Jason, there's a question from the audience for you. MIT Tech Review sees some of the best stuff in terms of new tech. Have you seen more stuff from individuals working independently instead of from a big firm?
Yes. You saw me hesitate there. Yes and no. So let me go up a level of abstraction and answer it this way. We tend to analogize from the Silicon Valley method, which is to rapidly fund a idea based upon commonly identifiable technologies. So VCs put X million dollars in, the company is launched and has to reach profitability in, say, 7 years. That model works very well for the web. It works very well for IT, and it can be tremendously disruptive. It can be civilizational scale in its disruption. So I see lots more individuals doing disruptive things in the IT space and the web space. But the truth is that there's a whole variety of other technologies that do need institutional support, as well as government funding of discovery research, and then they need billions of dollars to actually reach scale. So Technology Review sees the entire world of technology, both biotech and materials and manufacturing. That stuff is still largely is largely owned by big institutions.
Forgot Mars colonization.
And Mars, well, Elon's going to do that for me. But I do see lots of people doing incredibly cool things. It's useful to remember that Uber, which is now in 200 cities, was in a shared space south of Market 3 or 4 years ago, and was a really simple idea. It's actually not a complicated technology. It's applying an economic idea called dynamic pricing to a market, taxis that didn't have it before. That's completely civilizational in its scale, and that happened out of nowhere. But at the same time, you want to go and build a grid-scale battery that can store energy from intermittent sources like solar. That's going to be done at an institution like MIT, financed by the government, and then taken to market by an organization like General Electric.
Jessica, there's a couple of questions for you, but here's one of them. Was Rock Paper Robot your first business, and did you have any failed attempts at entrepreneurship before that?
It's my first business, and no, as long as this is considered a success. Some days it feels a little bit like a failure. So no, I didn't have any failed attempts.
And let me ask you another question, because there are a few for you. Are you worried about growing too much? I mean, you talked about that you're on the precipice of growing a lot. What happens when you become the big company that you didn't want to work for, or that didn't offer you a job coming right out of school?
I'm not sure if fear is the right word, but the concept, I look a lot at efficiency and productivity. And I see a lot of my friends who have companies that are scaling a lot complain about the fact that overall productivity goes down when there are more people. So I need to figure out what the business model is and how to, have the right people. And I hate when I start using these words like culture and things like this, but in fostering that culture that
We have courses at the business school on that.
I have to refrain from doing this. I have that compulsion. Makes it so that we stay somewhat small and intact, and probably use a lot of outside resources. But yes, and even having one other person. I mean, it's easy to double in size when you go from 2 to 4 people, right? But it's a big impact, and even that feels it's a tremendous onus to know that now you're responsible for people's livelihood and their happiness, even more so.
This is a question that both Nicco and Karim might want to get in on. But the question is, in a globalized economy, does it matter where you do business? And I mean, people like Richard Florida have talked about the rise of cities and that the really creative people want to live in cities, which you see then driving up rents in Boston and Brooklyn and San Francisco, and people can't afford. But does it matter anymore where you are if you can come up with a cool idea and be sitting in Iowa or in Bangalore or in Beijing and just sort of send that out there?
I think relationship still matters. I think that proximity and physical space probably matters less than it has in the past. Certainly when you're talking about scale and having offices around the world to conduct business, I'm not sure that matters the same way it used to. But I think, people still, intimacy is still important in business.
Yeah, so certainly, I mean, you look at the build out in Kendall Square with the biotechs. Certainly, a lot of pharmaceutical companies, a lot of biotechs are saying location matters. And in fact, I have a study on this where we did a field experiment with the medical school where we're trying to understand, given that you have information about all potential collaborators, does meeting somebody face to face make a difference in future collaborations? And we find it to be a big effect. And what we're seeing, because there are other studies that show that, in fact, there is this depth of distance, basically, because you can now, with the internet, communicate and coordinate across a lot of space and a lot of time. And what we sort of have figured out is that, in fact, there are 2 stages. There's a stage of the creative spark and the collaboration. For that, you need the physical contact. You need to be at conferences, at meetings, and develop the relationships. Once that bond is set, right, then the execution could happen in any place. And I think that's where I think people conflate this thing, that there is a real benefit to being in Cambridge, right, being in Boston, being in the Innovation District, or being in Kendall Square to meet the folks and get the things going. Once that is established, then you can be anywhere.
I think you needed the second stage as well. There actually are data on this, so we know for a fact that places like Kendall Square, Silicon Valley, Tel Aviv in Israel work for a reason. Yes. That creative spark where VCs and academics and entrepreneurs meet together and toss ideas around, that has to be done very close. Mm-hmm. But we also know that for a lot of really big ideas, these kind of civilizational scale problems, you also want the industrial base to be pretty close to the entrepreneur, because you need to see if it scales. So earlier I talked about the Schenectady GE plant. There's a really good real-world example of that. The entrepreneurs at GE literally walk across the courtyard and they say, "Can you make this for me?" And that scaling testing also needs to be tightly coupled. There are a lot of technologies that never get made because we don't have that tight coupling. And though it's easy to say it doesn't matter that the American industrial base is not what it once was, I think it does matter to the plant for this level. Yeah. America is still the research capital of the world. And the fact that we no longer make as many things here really does mean that some great ideas aren't being made. There was a company called A123 Systems a few years ago. It had a great car battery. It might have made electric cars possible in a way that it's taking Elon Musk at Tesla longer to get off the ground. A123 Systems didn't have the manufacturing base in this country to really scale those batteries. And I think that's a problem, because that might have meant that we might have had electric cars in General Motors and Ford a decade ago. So these things matter, I think.
So let me push you to one more question. We touched on this before, but I'm interested in sort of a closing comment from each of you. When we think about, we've been talking about creative people in the arts, creative people in technology, all sorts of things. When you think about where those creative people are going, the kind of money they're making, their ability to say, hey, I have a brand. I'm Randall Monroe. I do XKCD comic strip, and I can have the #1 New York Times bestseller, and he can work for any organization, and he's still that person with that brand. When you think about the empowerment of those people, what happens to other people? And the consolidation of money amongst those people. So, Jason, I know you guys have really looked at this. You wanna start sort of your view of this?
Yeah, I think it is a interesting period for individuals in determining where they want to go. If I was in college now, I would be embarrassed by the number of choices I had and where I might place myself. But what I've noticed about young people at the moment is they have a powerful desire to do good in the world, to make a positive difference. We call these the millennials. I would say that if I had the choice now as a young person to go forth in the world, I might choose a big problem and align myself with some of the folks like Karim to begin to crowdsource solutions to come up with a better way of doing things.
Karim, you want to take it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, I'm an optimist and engineer by training. Really believe in the fact that technical change is what drives the economy. And yes, there are adjustment periods. And yes, right now we're in a stage where we're seeing tremendous inequality in the economy. But at the same time, people are inherently problem solvers, and people will come up with new problems and will come up with ways to solve those problems. So I don't believe in this future that there's no growth and that we're going to be living in this bifurcation. I mean, I think Eric and Andrew have some good hypotheses about that, but I think that there's other Tesla hypotheses as well that will say that in fact we have more empowerment and we have more people like Jess participating in the economy in ways that this weren't possible before. So you see this, and you go, oh my goodness, are we back at the start of the Industrial Revolution? I mean, maybe, to some degree, but I also believe that adjustments will be made, and that people we will go after the big problems that we want to be solving in health, in energy, in food, and so forth.
Jessica, let me throw it to you, because in some ways the people who buy this table, right, are very often the beneficiaries. Did you mention how much this table costs?
This is $10K.
Yeah. So they're very often the beneficiaries of that, that black line up there. So what's your sort of, what do you see happening?
So I actually see, I work in a fabulous group of, with a fabulous group of people. So we have a place where not just my company, but a lot of other artists, designers, technologists work together. It's not co-working. Everyone's all about co-working now. It's more of a consortium, and it's built on a tremendous amount of trust. There's a lot of IP that's freely moving around. There's a lot of resource of mind and hand and material. And I think that nowadays, when your personality is really your brand, right? And so you have these entities that are like companies, that are people, but really can share. And I think there's so much power in that collaboration. I think that ultimately, collaboration is the next competition, and figuring out the best ways to do that is probably the way forward.
Sort of the kind of what Karim works on, this sort of crowdsourcing the ideas. Mm-hmm. Nicco, you want to?
So I'm maybe going to take a little different tack here. I mean, I think the world is full of opportunity if you're a student at an elite university.
Yeah.
But the Department of Labor for the last 5 years has had this study, between 16 and 19% of parking attendants in the United States have a 4-year college degree and the debt that comes with it. And, I think that broadly speaking, a lot of our institutions are not really prepared or addressing the challenges we're facing. And
Yes, I mean, I think there's an inconsistency between the skills needed in the economy versus what's being offered.
Do they have the right 4-year degree? I think is
Exactly,
the question.
exactly.
No, like I think that it's very possible that our system of higher education doesn't make any sense for the world we live in, right? And at the end of the day, I think this comes down to what kind of world do we want to live in, and what is the purpose of government, and to what extent is justice, social justice, an important part of America as a nation? And these questions, we have to address these questions.
Yes, that's right.
Otherwise, these trends will persist and may take us to some strange places. I'm not pessimistic about it necessarily, and I think that some of the solutions may be unintentional. You know, the more people get locked out of a traditional labor market, the more we see the rise of the barter economy and apps used to just circumvent currency almost entirely. And that creates all kinds of interesting underground economies and changes. This is especially prevalent in Greece and Spain right now, given the shape of their employment markets. And, you know, that's why I'm in favor of New England secession.
Wow, who knew we were going to end on that note?
But that's surely right. Technology is a tool. We must use technology rather than be used by it. We're not fated to have this dystopian future of the very rich and the very poor. There are tons of smart policy ideas out there. There are lots of great technologies, but we have to talk about it as a society, you know, as a democracy, and say what we want. And if we don't have those conversations, bad things will happen. But we can control our future.
I'm pessimistic given the gridlock in DC that we can actually have any kind of a serious conversation about this at a national level. What I'm optimistic about is, you know, the reason why I became an academic was because I couldn't understand the puzzle of open source software communities. How could it be Richard Stallman, right, and Linus Torvalds, you know, come together and create software when all the basic perspective was that you needed big corporations, IBMs and Microsofts, you know, you had to be in Armonk or you had to be in Seattle to create software. And here they were able to create their own institutions and their own ways, and that has now completely transformed the way we create software, and we're living in that world of the web. So I'm actually all for what you said, which is local communities getting together, right, and defining for themselves what's important and making change that way. Because I think relying on, you know, our politicians to do anything is I mean, you're the Kennedy School, so I know that's where you have to be at, but I just think that it's not working. Right, and we had all this great hope with Obama, and didn't come through.
The system is wildly out of date. We have 435 members of the House of Representatives because about 100 years ago they decided that's how many seats comfortably fit in the room.
Yes.
I mean, it's like we vote on Tuesday because Sunday's church day, Monday's market day, and you ride your horse and buggy into town to vote on Tuesday. The system and the rules around it are just ludicrous.
Well, that's next year's panel. Innovating government, that's it. Karim, Nicco, Jessica, Jason, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
$10,000.
And before we send you on your way, the 3D printed piece, so I think we've got a video, Ben, right? Do we have it in here somewhere? Oops.
A Veblen.
Do you want to press play?
Ooh.
So what they did, actually, the very kind folks at NVBots, they recorded time-lapse photography of every single one of those things being printed, just so you can see what it looks like. And while this is printing, AJ, you want to come out and bring the Klein bottle that was actually printed?
We actually were able to make 3.
Oh, wow.
Ooh.
One's printing right now.
Here, let's pass.
That is
We'll
awesome.
pass it through the audience, and you can also come up on the stage at the end to check it out. And the little Innovation Hub logo that AJ showed before, the keychain that turns around, they printed one for everybody in the audience. So on your way out, you'll get a little 3D printed thing for yourself.